A lonely black man risked his life to save an elderly white woman from drowning during a historic superstorm, then gave up his seat on the rescue helicopter so she could live. He drifted across the freezing floodwaters with an injured leg, a high fever, and a shivering puppy by his side. Just as his strength began to fade and the world seemed to forget him, one thing no one expected happened. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. The historic Hurricane Milton, a Category 5 storm, raged through Cove Haven, southwest Florida, one October night. It turned streets into rivers, destroying homes with furious winds and torrential rain. Lightning flashes revealed a chaotic scene of uprooted trees, sparking power lines, and torn-off roofs. The air was thick with fear and the smell of damp earth and sea. All transportation was paralyzed, cutting Cove Haven off from the world. Panic gripped the town as hope vanished in the storm's fury. Amidst the apocalyptic chaos, John Harper, a 38-year-old carpenter, his face etched with time and hardship, carried an indescribable sadness. Just 3 years prior, a grim boating accident had stolen his beloved wife, leaving an indelible scar on his soul. That loss had transformed John into a quiet, withdrawn man. He found solace only on his small fishing boat, his cherished possession, where he'd let his soul drift on the Gulf of Mexico, seeking to soothe the painful memories. As the storm howled, John rushed to his boat shed, driven by instinct to check his flooded home. But the sound of shouting from the street pulled him away. He saw a frantic stranger attempting to break into a submerged convenience store, while a panicked and enraged crowd of neighbors hurled insults. "Looter! Thief!" The man turned, his eyes bloodshot with desperation, not anger. His breath hitched as he stammered that his child had a high fever, and he just wanted to find medicine. But his weak pleas were quickly drowned out by the crowd's fury. Despite all the warnings, John approached the man. He didn't look at the act itself, but directly into those eyes filled with utter despair. They mirrored a fear he knew all too well, the fear of being helpless before the fate of a loved one. They don't understand that kind of despair, John thought to himself. "What do you need? Maybe I can help," John said, his voice calm, unusually warm amidst the chaos. When the man, with eyes wide in surprise mixed with hope, spoke of his sick child, John didn't hesitate to turn back to his own house. He rummaged through his medicine cabinet, pulling out children's fever reducers, pain relievers, and clean water. He handed them to the man, saying, "I hope this helps. Take good care of your child." John's gentle touch conveyed deep empathy. The man, with utmost gratitude in his eyes, quickly took the supplies and vanished into the rain and wind. A bitter murmur rose from the crowd. "He's really weird, helping a robber." John simply returned to his shed, ignoring the scrutinizing glances, his face showing only a strange calmness. "I just did what was right," he told himself. Immediately after returning inside, amidst the fierce howling wind and the clatter of corrugated iron, John heard a faint but clearer cry for help from the direction of Ms. Evelyn's house, an 82-year-old resident living alone, not far from the edge of Cove Haven, where the storm's first violent waves had crashed. That cry was not just a call for help. It was like an echo from the past, a painful memory of his late wife whom he couldn't save from the raging waters years ago. A powerful sense of guilt and urgency surged in his chest, suffocating him. "No, I won't let that happen again," John told himself, his heart wrenching. He rushed to the shed, grabbing his small fishing boat. He remembered his wife's words, her voice gentle yet firm, resonating in his mind like a vow. "To live is to give, John. Never give up hope in the kindness of people. Even when I'm gone, remember that." Determined not to let Ms. Evelyn suffer the same fate he had experienced, he defied all danger. John's small boat, like an arrow, cut through the strong currents, dodging debris from houses and trees drifting like monsters in the dark. He rowed with all his might, his muscles aching, but his will was iron. Each large wave crashed against the side of the boat, making it violently sway. As he neared Miss Evelyn's house, a sharp piece of corrugated iron, carried by the wind, grazed John's shoulder. He gritted his teeth, enduring the stinging pain, blood beginning to seep through his thin shirt, but he remained steadfast, holding firm to the oars, not letting out a single groan, prioritizing the old woman's safety. Finally, he reached Miss Evelyn's porch. The sight broke his heart. She was huddled, clutching a soaking wet blanket, her lips blue, her face pale from cold and fear, almost completely exhausted. "Miss Evelyn, are you there?" John called, his voice echoing amidst the wind and rain. He quickly approached. "Are you okay? I'll take you. You'll be fine." Mrs. Evelyn looked up, her eyes blurred with fear and exhaustion. "Oh, John, so cold. I can't move any more." She coughed weakly. "Just trust me, Miss Yunley. I'll take care of it," John said, trying to reassure her. He carefully helped her onto the boat, feeling as if he was fulfilling a promise to his late wife, bringing hope to a life hanging by a thread. He held Miss Yunley tightly so she wouldn't be swept away by the strong current, his hands trembling but steady. John and Miss Evelyn couldn't reach the rescue center immediately. The floodwaters were too strong, the roads were submerged deeper, and obstacles grew, making it impossible for the boat to go further. They were forced to find temporary shelter. John rode to a more sturdy two-story house nearby. Luckily, its second floor was still above water. With what little strength he had left, John helped Miss Evelyn climb onto the roof and get inside the abandoned second floor. The air inside was damp, but at least it provided shelter from the wind and rain. Miss Evelyn huddled, shivering in a corner, coughing continuously. "I'm sorry, Miss Evelyn. We'll have to stay here for a while," John said, looking at her apologetically. Mrs. Evelyn gently shook her head. "It's okay, John. You saved me. You're my benefactor," she shivered, hugging herself. John fumbled in his pocket, finding a small packet of crackers and a leftover bottle of clean water. He himself was starving and parched, but he didn't hesitate, handing all the crackers and water to Miss Evelyn, saying, "Eat this for strength. I'm fine." "What about you?" Miss Evelyn asked, her voice weak. "I'm fine. You just eat," John reassured her. Miss Evelyn looked at him with eyes full of gratitude and worry, carefully taking them. The two huddled in the darkness, only the sound of rain and wind hitting the windows and waves crashing against the house walls, a weary wait in the endless, stormy night. John and Miss Evelyn stayed in that abandoned house for a full day. The storm showed no sign of completely subsiding, but the wind had lessened, giving way to continuous downpours. Miss Evelyn grew weaker, her breathing ragged, and she constantly shivered from the cold. The wound on John's shoulder from the corrugated iron was still stinging and aching, but he tried to ignore it to care for the old woman. On the afternoon of the second day, just as they were almost despairing, a Coast Guard rescue helicopter suddenly appeared in the gloomy sky. The sound of its rotors cut through the wind, its searchlights sweeping across the house. John's heart pounded in his chest. He used all his remaining strength, desperately waving and shouting loudly. The helicopter descended slowly, and a rope and a rescue basket were lowered. John turned to look at Miss Evelyn, her eyes lit up with a fragile glimmer of hope. He knew this was their only chance, but as the basket touched down, John realized a harsh truth. It only had room for one person, either John or Miss Evelyn. A moment of silence stretched amidst the howling wind, as John and Miss Evelyn looked at each other. John's physical pain was screaming, but a decision had been made in his mind without hesitation. "I promised her. To live is to give," he told himself, remembering his wife's words. "She needs saving more than I do. She's so weak." His unconditional kindness surged, stronger than his instinct for survival. "Mrs. Evelyn, you go first," John said, his voice hoarse but resolute, his eyes looking straight at the old woman, full of reassurance. "I'm fine. They'll come back for me. You need medical attention immediately." Mrs. Evelyn gripped his hand, her eyes tearful. "No, John, you're injured too. You go first." She tried to push him towards the basket. John shook his head, his gaze conveying unspoken sacrifice. "It's okay, Miss Evelyn. I can endure it. You go. Don't worry about me." He carefully helped the old woman into the rescue basket, her hands trembling as they gripped his arm. Her eyes were full of tears. She wanted to protest, but John shook his head, his gaze conveying unspoken sacrifice. "You must live, Miss Evelyn. You must live." The rescue basket was slowly pulled up, carrying the frail Miss Evelyn into the air, blending into the rain. Miss Evelyn kept turning back to look at John, her eyes full of gratitude and worry, like a plea for him to stay safe. John stood there, watching until the helicopter was just a tiny, blurry dot in the gray sky, then disappeared completely. He sighed, a sharp pain shooting up from his shoulder, but strangely, his heart felt lighter. I did what was right, he thought. A sense of solitude enveloped him as he looked out at the vast expanse of water, the sound of the storm raging again like a challenge. He knew that from now on he was alone. Minutes after the helicopter left, John, still reeling from his shoulder wound, stumbled and plunged through a rotten floorboard. An icy shock and searing pain ripped through his right leg as a sharp wooden beam pinned him against the submerged roof of a truck below. His lungs burned, breath stolen by the impact. "No, this can't be happening," he screamed internally, clinging to the precarious truck roof as blood bloomed in the dark water. The scorching pain nearly consumed him, and he realized he was utterly trapped. Looking down, his leg was already swollen and purpling, a terrifying sign of rapid infection. Damn it! Again! The familiar terror of helplessness, so akin to losing his wife, washed over him. Trapped on the drifting truck roof, John was consumed by the agony of his infected leg wound. Every movement sent searing pain through him as cold numbness spread. The swelling and purpling, coupled with a foul odor, screamed of a severe infection. "If this continues, I won't last," he thought, desperately clinging to consciousness. Amidst the demonic howl of the wind and stinging rain, a faint, desperate cry pierced the gloom. Not human, but from a tiny creature. A small, trembling, soaking wet puppy clung to a drifting tree branch, its wide eyes reflecting pure terror. Despite his own dire state, John didn't hesitate. "I can't leave it," he reasoned. He leveraged a nearby piece of wood, reaching out to pull the shivering puppy onto the truck roof. The dog curled beside him, its small warmth a tiny spark in the horrifying night. John stroked its wet fur and whispered, "Hello, Storm. You're my friend now." A new responsibility, a reason to keep fighting ignited within him. Storm gently nudged his hand, as if trying to keep him awake and present. John and Storm remained stranded for another full day, adrift on Cove Haven's vast floodwaters. The relentless weather pushed them to their limits, chilling rain, tearing winds, and continuous lightning. John's leg wound worsened, the infection causing high fevers and disorienting delirium. He tore a piece of his shirt to makeshift bandage the wound, a fragile hope of staving off the infection. "I have to hold on, he murmured, each word an immense effort. Hunger and thirst became formidable enemies. John's stomach cramped, his throat parched. He licked raindrops, but it wasn't enough. He searched the submerged truck, finding a broken water bottle and a few soggy crackers, not enough to truly satisfy his gnawing hunger. Despair flickered, but he fought it. Must find a way, must survive. When hunger and thirst gnawed, he pictured his wife, their warm meals, her words about resilience and never giving up. These memories, coupled with Storm's presence, anchored him. He had to live, for himself, for Storm, and to honor his promise to his late wife. As the sun set, painting the sky red, John caught sight of a faint, ghostly light in the distance. He rubbed his eyes. A lamp? Or a feverish hallucination? Despite the uncertainty, a fragile spark of hope ignited. It must be real. Someone must be coming. He summoned his last reserves of strength, paddling towards the light, each stroke a prayer, a promise to Storm and himself. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he couldn't stop. That faint hope, like a tiny lighthouse in the dark, became his sole motivation. In his feverish delirium, his wife's image was clearer than ever. Their sea trips, the peace before life's storms. He recalled his promise to protect her and the soul-crushing pain of failing. The waves crashing against the raft echoed that fateful day. The fear of failure resurfaced, but now with a fiercer determination. He wouldn't let Storm suffer the same fate. "I lost her. I can't lose anyone else. John fought to banish negative thoughts, focusing on their survival. He would fight to the end. Not just to atone for the past, but to prove that kindness and resilience could conquer any adversity. Meanwhile, at the temporary rescue center, David, Ms. Evelyn's son, anxiously awaited his mother. The moment he saw Ms. Evelyn lowered from the helicopter, he rushed to embrace her. "Mom, are you okay?" he choked out. Mrs. Evelyn, still weak, gripped her son's hand, her eyes welling up. "Son, I'm okay now, but the man who saved me, he gave up his spot on the helicopter. He's still out there, alone in the storm. He's injured, such a kind man." Her voice trembled with worry for John. "You have to find him, David. You have to find him." David froze. He'd heard vague town rumors about an eccentric John Harper who avoided people. But his mother's account was entirely different. An eccentric? No, this is a hero. A wave of shame washed over him. John had sacrificed himself for his mother. David's resolve to find his benefactor surged. He immediately leveraged his authority, contacting rescue teams, mobilizing corporate resources, and ordering an urgent search, despite the still complex storm. "By all means, we must find him," David insisted, his voice strong and commanding. "This isn't just a rescue mission. This is what must be done. He saved my mother. Find John." That was his only thought. As John and Storm continued to drift on the makeshift raft, John's fever worsened. He coughed continuously and felt chills, even though he tried to keep warm by huddling and pressing close to Storm. The puppy, seemingly sensing his condition, lay quietly beside him, occasionally licking John's trembling hand. Storm's presence was his only comfort at that moment. "At least I'm not alone," John thought, stroking Storm. Storm would gently nip at his hand, as if urging him to stay conscious through the haze of fever. That night, when John was almost exhausted and desperate, a second Coast Guard rescue helicopter suddenly appeared, flying close by. The sound of its rotors cut through the wind, its searchlight sweeping across John's roof, only a few tens of meters away. John's heart pounded in his chest, a powerful spark of hope ignited. "They're here! Finally, they're here!" He used his last bit of strength, waving frantically, his other hand trying to signal help with his faint phone flashlight, and shouting loudly, his voice hoarse from thirst and exhaustion. "Here! We're here!" But John was injured and had slid into a hidden corner on the truck roof, completely out of sight of the rescue team above. The helicopter's light only swept over his initial position before he fell, and with the heavy rain and storm fog, the pilot couldn't spot that a second person was still trapped. The helicopter paused for only a few seconds in another area before slowly flying away into the stormy night, its engine sound fading, growing smaller. A feeling of utter despair, heavier than any physical pain, surged within John, consuming him. He collapsed onto the truck roof, his head hitting the cold metal hard, tears mixing with rain streaming down his face. "They left me. They left me in Storm," John whispered, his voice lost in the wind. "They left us, Storm. They left us." Just then, Storm, seemingly sensing John's extreme despair, gently nudged his head against John's trembling hand and whimpered softly, a weak but comforting sound, as if to say, "Don't give up." John looked at Storm, curled up beside him, the tiny dog shivering from cold and hunger but still resilient, its loyal eyes fixed on him. He suddenly remembered what his late wife had told him years ago. "No matter what happens, John, never give up. Hold on to hope." The bond with Storm became an extraordinary source of motivation, helping John cling to hope. "No, I can't give up, not for Storm, not for her." He wasn't just fighting for himself, but for the tiny creature relying on him. At the same time, at the Rescue Command Center, David paced nervously. He had personally participated in several search flights and had mobilized additional experienced volunteer teams. When the helicopter returned without finding John, his heart sank. "Didn't find him? Are you sure?" David asked, his voice filled with worry. "Sir, we've swept that area multiple times. There's no sign of a second person," a rescue team member reported. "We can't give up," David insisted, his voice strong and commanding in the control room. "That man saved my mother. He deserves to be found." He expanded the search area, using thermal imaging and infrared cameras despite the still incredibly harsh weather conditions. David believed John was still alive, and he would not stop searching until he found his mother's benefactor. "I won't let him suffer alone." As David reviewed maps and directed his team, he suddenly noticed a detailed report on the Gulf's underwater currents during storm conditions, which he had previously overlooked while focusing on the nearshore area. He recognized an anomaly. A strong undertow was pushing debris and drifting objects farther offshore, towards the southeast. Wait, if he drifted, it must be in this direction. A powerful hunch told him John couldn't be near shore as they had thought. He immediately directed the rescue team to focus their search on that area, a wide-open sea region least expected. "Focus on the southeast area, along the undertow," David ordered, his eyes full of determination. "I have a feeling he's still there. Prepare a new team and another helicopter. We'll go immediately." He knew he was taking a gamble, but this was their last hope. As John and Storm continued to drift, suddenly Storm barked again, this time not a warning of danger, but a joyful, excited bark. John looked up. Though still dazed from fever, he tried to look ahead. In the still hazy night sky, a second helicopter was appearing, but this time it was flying lower and more steadily. The helicopter's spotlight swept down onto the water, and John could clearly see a small dry area, seemingly part of a multi-stremy house, where several people were waving for help. The helicopter was preparing to lower a rope. A strong spark of hope ignited in John's chest. This time it must be real. He used his last bit of strength, trying to paddle the raft towards that light. He could hear the helicopter's engine closer and the sound of people shouting. He was sure they wouldn't miss him this time. As John's raft approached, one of the people on the roof saw him. It was a middle-aged man, tall, his eyes filled with worry and impatience. He gestured for the helicopter to descend and stared intently at John. As John's raft neared the makeshift shelter, the man immediately approached. It was David, the CEO of the large real estate conglomerate, who had been tirelessly searching for him for hours. David's face showed immense relief as he saw John. "John, I finally found you!" David exclaimed, his voice choked with emotion as he knelt beside John. He quickly examined John's leg wound, his face creasing with worry as he saw the swollen, purplish wound with severe signs of infection, a real threat to John's life. David didn't say much. He knew time was of the essence. "Get him onto the helicopter immediately. Emergency medical care," David ordered the rescue team in a decisive, authoritative voice. On the rescue helicopter, John received emergency care from the medical staff. Although the pain still tormented him, he felt immense relief. He looked at David, who was sitting beside Miss Evelyn and gently stroking Storm. Miss Evelyn, though still weak, was sobbing with happiness at seeing her son and John safe. "John, my mother told me everything," David said, his eyes red-rimmed, filled with gratitude and remorse. "I had heard rumors about you being eccentric, but now I understand. You are a hero. I'm sorry for ever doubting you." He bowed deeply to John, an act of profound respect. John looked at David, smiling weakly. He didn't need words of thanks or recognition. The most important thing was that he had done what was right. He had saved Miss Evelyn, and he had survived with Storm. Amidst the chaos of disaster, kindness and sacrifice could still illuminate and dispel all misunderstandings, transcending all status and prejudice. John closed his eyes, his body exhausted, but his mind felt strangely peaceful. He had survived, and he had done what was right. The following days passed in a haze for John. He awoke in a stark white hospital room, the smell of antiseptic filling his nostrils, and the steady beeping of machines around him. His right leg was carefully bandaged, but the doctor explained that the severe infection had caused significant nerve damage and soft tissue damage, highly likely leading to permanent, mild paralysis or muscle weakness in his leg. The dull ache was still there, but no longer as intense as when he was trapped in the water. Immediately he felt a warm, familiar presence beside him. Storm was curled up at the foot of the bed, its eyes gleaming as it looked at him. John smiled faintly, reaching out to stroke the dog's fur. I survived. Storm 2. A strange sense of peace spread through his chest, mixed with worry about the future. The hospital room door gently opened, and David walked in, holding a fresh bouquet of flowers. As soon as he saw John awake, David rushed over, his face full of relief and joy. "John, you're awake, thank God," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "My mother was so worried about you. She's recovering well in the room next door." John nodded faintly, trying to lift his hand. I'm fine." David placed the flowers down, sitting in the chair beside the bed. He looked directly at John, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I truly don't know what to say to thank you. You saved my mother. You sacrificed yourself. I had heard rumors about you being eccentric, but now I understand. You are a hero. I'm sorry for ever doubting you." He bowed deeply to John, an act of profound respect. John looked at David. He saw the sincerity in this man's eyes. John nodded gently. "It's okay. The important thing is she's well." Throughout John's hospital stay, David was a constant, supportive presence. He arranged for top medical specialists to treat John's severe leg injury, covering all costs for his extensive rehabilitation and physical therapy. Though John faced months of painful recovery and often felt disheartened, Storm's comforting presence, Miss Evelyn's encouragement, and David's unwavering support spurred him on. He learned to walk again, his large leg scar a testament to his resilience. John slowly opened up, sharing the lingering trauma of his wife's accident, and David listened with sincere understanding, forming a deep trust and respect between them. When John was discharged, David drove him back to his devastated home. Despite the wreckage, John felt no despair. He saw his neighbors united and helping each other, a scene now filled with smiles, greetings, and genuine encouragement. David also leveraged his connections and personal resources to help John repair and rebuild his home. John, looking at his neighbors, felt a unity he'd thought was lost. As John began returning to his workshop and teaching, the man he'd helped earlier unexpectedly reappeared, but instead of gratitude, his eyes blazed with a chilling mix of fear and accusation. He stumbled over his words, accusing John of doing something shady during the storm, muttering, "My child didn't get better immediately. And then CPS came. You must have been the one who reported me." He believed John had somehow alerted authorities, leading to his child being briefly taken for protective services due to the chaotic conditions and the father's earlier desperate actions. Old neighbors who had once doubted John started whispering again, their skepticism reigniting. "See, I told you, that guy's weird," a woman murmured, loud enough for John to hear. The situation grew tense, placing John, even after becoming a hero, in a difficult position, a final, painful test of his faith in human nature and his own kindness. John faced the accusation calmly, almost expressionlessly. He looked directly at the man, his eyes unwavering. "I gave everything I had. I asked for nothing in return." His voice was calm but firm, as if his hardships had forged him beyond all baseless accusations. He turned to the neighbors who watched, slowly recounting his encounter with the father, the desperation he saw in his eyes, and his decision to help. He wasn't defending himself, simply sharing his truth in a calm, non-judgmental tone. Each word John spoke seemed to wash away old prejudices, turning skeptical glances into surprise, then understanding. They began to recall his selfless acts throughout the storm. How he didn't hesitate to save Miss Evelyn, how he survived with Storm. Gradually, understanding and compassion seeped through the crowd. Some neighbors nodded in agreement, others looked down. The father, listening to John's words and witnessing the reaction of those around him, completely broke down. He looked into John's resolute eyes, and then the lies and doubt within him suddenly vanished. He shamefully lowered his head. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'm truly sorry, John," he stammered, his voice full of remorse. At this moment, John looked at the neighbors who had whispered, and then at the whole town. He saw understanding, remorse, and respect in their eyes. They understand. Finally they understand, John thought to himself, a deep sense of peace spreading through his chest. John retained his leg and eventually returned to his carpentry workshop, though he had to use crutches and walked with difficulty. He not only worked but also transformed his workshop into a free training center for disadvantaged youth in Cove Haven and neighboring towns, especially those who lost much after the storm. He shared not only his carpentry skills but also invaluable lessons on resilience, compassion, and perseverance from his and Storm's survival story. On the opening day of the renewed carpentry workshop, as John was chatting with his first apprentices, Storm ran out from a corner of the workshop, holding a small piece of wood in its mouth, cleaned and polished. John recognized it as the very piece of wood he had carved the words, "Still Standing," on the roof. When trapped in the storm, he smiled, picked up the wood, and told his apprentices, his voice resonating with conviction. "One day, a small dog saved me from giving up. Life always has challenges, storms. But as long as we are still standing, as long as we hold on to kindness, as long as we have hope, we will overcome." The people of Cove Haven also solemnly erected a bronze plaque engraved with his and Storm's names, placing it in front of the workshop as an eternal tribute, reminding everyone of the kindness and resilience that helped them overcome the storm. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.